Assalamu alaikum students. Let us study about satellites, the types of satellites and uses of satellites. Satellites are man-made devices. There are about 2000 communication satellites in Earth's orbit, used by both private and government organizations. There are basically two types of satellites. Let us see what are they. We have geostationary satellites and polar satellites. As you can see in the image, the geostationary satellites, they orbit around the Earth in a circular manner, like that parallel to the equator. And polar satellites, they orbit around the poles of the Earth. The orbit of geostationary satellites is circular around the Earth, and polar satellites, they have elliptical orbit around the North Pole and the South Pole of the Earth. Let us see the exact definition of what are geostationary satellites. These are the satellites which are placed by the scientists. Yes, they are placed around the Earth. They are not placed anywhere around the Earth. Their position around the Earth is fixed. The height above the Earth is also fixed. And they are in the same orbit. As you know, the Earth revolves around the Sun and it rotates around itself in a fixed orbit. Yes, it goes in a circular manner only. That is called its orbit. So satellites are also placed in a fixed orbit to that of the Earth, and the height of them, they are calculated, and then only they are positioned above the Earth. So as the name geostationary satellite, as the name suggests, stationary means not moving. So what are these satellites do? Geostationary satellites, their position is fixed above the Earth. They are fixed at one place above the Earth, and they remain over there at that point on the Earth's surface. That is why they are called as geostationary. And then from there they are used for telecommunications, and from there they take up these signals and they give these signals to other places on the Earth. So that is what is called as geostationary satellite. Now let us see what is a polar satellite. As you know, Earth has two poles, North Pole and South Poles. So the satellites which revolve around this North Pole and South Pole in orbit, those satellites are called as polar satellites. Usually these satellites are positioned nearly 500 to 800 kilometers above the Earth poles. So let us see the difference between geostationary and polar satellites. Geostationary satellites, they orbit around the Earth axis, and the movement of them is same as the Earth spins. So that is why they can capture only one spot of the Earth. While polar satellites, they are also known as sun synchronous satellites. They can monitor strong storms that move across the poles. So this is an image where this shows how the satellites are placed around the Earth in an orbit. If you can see, They are not anyhow, they are in a circular manner around the earth, so they are placed in a fixed orbit, and their height is of course fixed from the earth, and then they are positioned. So there are around 2000 satellites like this all around the earth. So these have been uh, stationed or positioned by different countries of the whole world. So like these satellites are placed, and what they do is they carry signals from one place, and they can then pass those signals to other places on the earth. Suppose a match is happening in USA, but then we are sitting in India and we can watch that match. How is this possible? This is only possible because of satellites. Satellites, they carry all the information from one place to another. They also help in giving internet signals and sharing information, or they help you to give telephone signals also. Let's see now what are the applications, that is, what are the uses of satellites. Satellites are used in sending telephone signals or for sending television signals. Signals of radios can also be sent over long distances through satellites. It is also used for weather forecasting. The weather of different places can be monitored and can be seen by these satellites. They are used for security purposes. That means messages, especially military messages, are sent through these satellites. Then internet, the internet signals, the data signal required for internet, use of internet also takes place through satellites. It is also used for GPS, that is Global Positioning System. Here in Global Positioning System, you can track any location of a person through this system. So how do these signals pass from one person to another? How do we get information about different people through GPS? It's only because of the signals. And from where these signals are transferred? They are transferred through satellites. Now, if you try to segregate and find out the uses of polar satellites and geostationary satellites, the polar satellites are used for weather forecasting because they are placed closer to the poles. So they study it, they can give you a detailed, in-depth view, closer view of the earth. They are also used for imaging Earth's surfaces. If you want to study the surface of the earth or the physical features of a region, then polar satellites are used. Now the word low polar orbits, now polar satellites can also be placed at lower heights from the earth, so that the study of the earth or the imaging of the earth's surface becomes more easier. They are also placed at medium height above the earth, which are called as medium polar orbit satellites. And the other type of polar satellites is higher polar orbit satellites, which are placed at a particular height above the earth's surface. So depending upon the application they use, the polar satellites are placed above the earth. Polar satellites are also used in spy satellites. Now spy satellites are used by intelligence department or by military departments if they want to send some important or secret message to their personnel, then they use these spy satellites. So spy satellites are also type of polar satellites. Then polar satellites are also used for scientific researches to study the geographical conditions or volcanic activities of the regions, or the earthquake situation, or the study of the ocean water body. So everything on the earth's surface can be studied through these satellites. And the other use of polar satellite is for global positioning system. So since they are placed closer to the earth near the poles, they can give you the timings of the exact position and timings of a person, and then they can be tracked using the system GPS, that is global positioning system. While geostationary satellites, they are at a higher height above the Earth's surface. They are around the orbit, same as that of the orbit of the Earth. So they are very far away from the Earth's surface. So that is why large distances signals can be transferred using geostationary satellites. So they are used for communications of televisions, radios, internet. So that is done, all those communications are done through geostationary satellites. Also, the weather forecasting of different places all over the world can also be studied using geostationary satellites. So, students, satellites are man-made objects. They are stationed or they are positioned around the Earth's surface, and they are of two types: geostationary satellites and polar satellites. Geostationary satellites, they orbit around the Earth in a fixed orbit. They revolve around the Earth in a fixed orbit, and the orbit of them is circular, while polar satellites are placed at the poles of the Earth, and their orbit is elliptical around the Earth. Thank you.